He's one step closer to forming Israel's next government and one step closer to burying any hope of a negotiated settlement with Palestinians. Benjamin Netanyahu claims victory in this week's elections. Now his plan to annex occupied territories as part of Washington's peace deal seems more real than ever. I'm Imran Garda, and today on the Newsmakers, we turn our focus to Jerusalem and look at how Palestinians are being pushed out. Just days before Israel's election, embattled Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced construction of thousands of new settlements in occupied East Jerusalem, something one Israeli NGO describes as state suicide. It followed an earlier promise he made to begin annexing territory in the West Bank immediately after the election. It's a move that would effectively give Israel dominion over a third of the West Bank and all but eliminate the possibility of a sovereign Palestine. But while politicians try to redraw maps and move borders and boundaries to their advantage, those living on the ground face a different reality. Haider Abbasi traveled to occupied East Jerusalem and met one man who, like many Palestinians, has found himself not just stateless, but homeless.
أنا عمري اليوم 43 سنة، كل اللي اشتغلته بحياتي صنعته في هذا البيت، وللأسف إنه انهدم. ما بضل في عمري كمان 43 سنة حتى أرجع أبني كمان بيت مثل هذا البيت.
Ismail's home was knocked down by the Israeli military. They said it was a security threat because it was built too close to the separation barrier. Ismail tells me how dozens of Israeli soldiers came to his house one night last year and threw his family out in the street. After his home was demolished, Ismail erected a tent for the family to sleep in. But the next day, the soldiers returned and took it down.
أول إشي بدي أقول لك شغلي، هذه الأرض إحنا أصحابها. الوطن وطننا والأرض أرضنا، يعني ما بصير إحنا نسلم للكيان الصهيوني كيف ما بده. بالنسبة لنا إحنا عايشين على أساس إحنا أصحاب الأرض وأصحاب الوطن وأصحاب البيت. طبعاً ببني اليوم، ولو هدموا لي برجع ببني بكرة. يعني إحنا أصحاب حق، ما بمشي انه نمشي زي ما بدها اسرائيل نقعد بالشوارع او ارحل على الضفه. يعني انا ابن القدس وانا موجود بالقدس، ما بطلع من اراضي القدس نهائيا. شو مكان تاكل فيه لو بدي اصفي بالشارع راح اثبت اضل موجود هان.
For years, Israel has been demolishing the homes of Palestinians in the occupied territories. Israel says most were built illegally, but Palestinians say it's nearly impossible to get building permits. According to a report by Israeli NGO Ir home demolitions rose by nearly 50% in 2019.
People have two possibilities when they want to get married and make a family. Either they have to leave the city, and then that's exactly the aim of the Israeli policy, or they say, we own land, we see how the government, Israeli government, is building only for Israelis. We will build on our land, it's our private land, because we want to stay in our community, near our family, we don't want to be driven away. So people are actually forced to choose between living and building without a permit.
Palestinians say if they leave East Jerusalem to live in the occupied West Bank, they risk losing their residency status, which means they won't be able to return to live in the city. Last month, the Jerusalem municipality ordered the evacuation of 22 Palestinian-owned homes in the old city. Daher Sharabati is among those told he must abandon his home.
نتيجة الاهتزازات الإسرائيلية اللي بتصير في الحفر، بس هو طبعا مش هون الحفر بعيد، بس بصير تفجيرات في الحفريات، بصير هذا نتيجة هذا الشيء صار.
Those noises were made by Israeli excavators working near the Haram al-Sharif. Daher is afraid that if he leaves his home, he might not be allowed to return and won't be given permission to build a new one. Israeli human rights group B'Tselem says the Jerusalem municipality deliberately avoids investing in infrastructure and services in Palestinian neighborhoods. The result is crumbling buildings, hazardous roads and sewage overflowing onto the streets. The death of 8-year-old Kais Abu Ramila last month brought this neglect into focus. It's believed he fell into a flooded trench where his frozen body was found. This is the ditch in occupied East Jerusalem where the body of Qais Abu Ramila was found. Now, at the time, this fence didn't exist. Critics say his death could have been prevented if the city council showed more care for Palestinian neighborhoods. Daniel Seidman is a lawyer and expert on Israel's occupation of East Jerusalem. He disagrees that Israel wants the Palestinians to leave the city.
Instead of driving the Palestinians out, I think this is a one of control and subjugation. And here you can see a parallel on the policies on the ground and the Trump plan share the same DNA. We're going to buy the Palestinians with trinkets from our budget, placate them with crumbs from our budgets, and promise them a good life as long as they will waive their national identity and and aspirations, or we're going to break their will. We're going to crush them.
So is this a war of attrition? Is Israel grinding Palestinians down, making their lives so unbearable that they give up and leave? Haider Abbasi, The Newsmakers, occupied East Jerusalem.
Well, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is political analyst Omar Baddar. He's also on the National Policy Council of the Arab American Institute. In Tel Aviv, we have Ariel Bulshtein, a special advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and a political commentator for Israel Hayom. And from West Jerusalem is Jeff Halper. He's the director of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. Gentlemen, good to have you all on the program. Jeff Halper, let me start with you. When it comes to Israel and its relationship with Palestinians, especially those in East Jerusalem, what do the house demolitions represent?
Well, first of all, let me say there is no relationship with Palestinians. We don't even call them Palestinians. We call them Arabs because we don't recognize their national existence or the national rights. For the last 125 years, the history of Zionism has been one of Judaizing the country. This is a formal term used by the Israeli government. So we're Judaizing Jerusalem. We're turning an Arab city into a Jewish city. We're Judaizing the entire country of Palestine, turning an Arab country into a Jewish country. That's the overall overarching purpose of everything. And therefore, the purpose of house demolitions is simply to clear the land, to get as many Palestinians out of the city as possible in order to Judaize it. And in fact, Israel has completely destroyed a Palestinian city. There is no more city called East Jerusalem that was supposed to be the capital city of the state of Palestine with the two-state idea. Israel's destroyed it. There is no more economic life there. The neighborhoods are all disconnected from each other. There are today more Israelis living in East Jerusalem, in the Palestinian part of the city, than there are Palestinians. With, of course, all the house demolitions going on, but not just house demolitions, of course. Israel doesn't allow Palestinians to build new homes for the last 50 years. And so really this process of Judaization means a complete and utter takeover of the city and the country by Israel, and as much as possible either to drive Palestinians out or to make them submit to Bantustans in small enclaves of the country and of the city.
Ariel Bulshtein, so either drive them out or make them submit to Bantustans, or as Danny Sederman said, have them under your control and subjugation. Is that the plan?
It's a nonsense. Actually, the Arab citizens of Jerusalem, exactly like Jewish citizens, exactly like any other citizens in Jerusalem, have the same rights and the same obligations. If, for example, me, like an Israeli Jew, start to build something without permission, especially on a land that I do not own, it will be demolished in minutes. The same goes with Arabs, with anybody else, Armenians, Englishmen, Americans. That's what I call the legal society, or the society that is ruled by the rule of law. Exactly like me, when I want to buy a flat in Jerusalem, I cannot just build on any piece of land and any portion of land. Usually the majority of Israelis in a big city, by the way, not only in Jerusalem, take any city in the world. If you want to live in New York, for example, you just go and buy a flat.
Yeah, but
Thousands.
there's no military occupation in New York that I've heard of, sir. Okay.
Just buy flat.
Okay.
A lot of them are Arabs, others are Jews. It's the same.
Okay.
There is no any
So you say it's the law.
discrimination toward Arab citizens of Jerusalem.
Okay, you say it's the law, but again, I haven't heard of a military occupation in New York. Well, at least not yet. Omar Baddar.
There is no military occupation in Jerusalem.
Okay, and it's pretty revealing that you say that in
let's-
itself. Omar Baddar, come in.
Yep, there's not an ounce of honesty in anything that Ariel has just said. I mean, yes, of course, you need permits in order to allow for buildings to take place, for building to actually happen. But as Amnesty International, one of the most respected human rights organizations in the world, points out, those permits are systematically denied to Palestinians, and we are talking about occupied Palestinian territories in East Jerusalem. This is a piece of land that Israel is not entitled to and is obligated to withdraw from under international law. So what is actually unfolding in East Jerusalem is ethnic cleansing in slow motion, pure and simple. And it requires a lot more outrage that we're seeing. I mean, obviously, the Trump administration's endorsement of Israeli policy is reprehensible in every way. But even the European reaction to what is taking place is really shameful, because we've seen that Germany and France had expressed concern recently. And really, when we're talking about ethnic cleansing, we're not talking about a moment that simply calls on people to express reserved objections, but it's really a moment that calls on meaningful condemnations that is backed up by actions to really hold Israel accountable for what it's carrying out in East Jerusalem.
Ariel?
Of course, there is no ethnic cleansing. On the contrary, if the situation is very bad in Israel for Arabs, why there are thousands, dozens of thousands of Arab citizens of the neighboring states, either Jordan or Egypt or Syria or Lebanon, that are dreaming to move to Israel because the quality of life, the democracy here is a real thing for both Jews and Arabs. On the contrary, the only citizens that are discriminated again in Jerusalem, for example, are Jews, because only the Jews are not allowed, for example, to pray on the Temple Mount. The Israeli
This is completely preposterous. This is just utterly preposterous. Come on, Ariel, get serious for a moment.
Not there is
I, for example, literally video documentation
to visit the Temple Mount, and
Ariel,
every Muslim, including you, can visit it every hour.
Omar?
Yeah, there is literally video documentation of Palestinians being thrown out of their homes in East Jerusalem and having these homes turned over so Israeli settlers can take them over. And then you have people living in Gaza in utter squalid conditions who are essentially starving, and you have Israel carrying out massive bombing campaigns of the Gaza Strip that kill hundreds of children. The idea that Palestinians have a good life under Israeli occupation is the most preposterous thing that has ever been said.
I want to bring Jeff in.
Let's get a little bit serious and come back to reality.
I want to bring in Jeff. Now, Jeff, some people try to separate this out here, right? When they look at, say, Netanyahu announcing new settlements, so we have 3,500 that were pledged during this electoral campaign. It seems as if it's been an electoral campaign forever and ever over the past few months. So new settlements in the West Bank, the E1 zone, right? So it's to expand Ma'ali Adumim, right? So it connects Jerusalem and the West Bank. Some people try to separate this out. They say, well, okay, you have the settlements, and that's a separate thing from the housing demolitions in a place like East Jerusalem. That's merely about building illegally, no more, no less. Help me understand that and tell me if you see it as something that's separate.
Again, you have to put everything within the framework of Judaization. The point of Zionism, of Israel over the last 125 years, has been to take over the entire country. Not just Jerusalem, not just 78% of the country, but everything. And you see that with the whole settlement project that's going on. So basically, Jerusalem has become a region that it controls the whole central part of the West Bank. And the E1 plan, which is a plan to connect one of the largest settlements in the West Bank, Ma'ale Adumim, with Jerusalem, means the entire central part of the West Bank essentially becomes Jerusalem as an annex to Israel. And even the United States says that if the E1 plan is done, if Israel builds an E1, that is the end of the two-state solution. I mean, the two-state solution is an illusion anyway. Israel never intended for a Palestinian state. But this is still what the Americans and the Europeans continue to in terms of their conflict management to sort of push. But even the Americans and even the Europeans are saying if Israel builds an E1, that's the end of the two-state solution. So there's a very intimate connection between the expansion of Jerusalem and the impossibility of finding any kind of political resolution to this conflict.
Talking about a political resolution, Jeff, when we look at the election results, yes, Netanyahu has claimed victory, and this might mean, okay, continuation of occupation and the same policies. But a little subplot within those elections, you have the joint list, the Arab parties, right? They won 15 seats. Now, I wonder, when we look at this, when we have the Palestinian citizens of Israel or the Arab Israelis, whatever you want to call them, when you see less apathy among them, the 20% of the population and so on, more of them decided to vote this time around. Is it possible in this Israeli democracy for those citizens to have some sort of active influence in reversing policies such as housing demolitions if they have more of a political say?
No. And I'll tell you why. Because we have a concept in our political life of a Jewish majority of parliament. There's no concept of Arab citizens. There's Israeli Jewish citizens, and then there's the Arab sector, or Arabs. And Arabs are not allowed, not only by the Likud party, by the blue-white party, the main opposition party, they're not even allowed to, not only to be in the coalition, they're not allowed to support the coalition. So that they've been completely eliminated. And all decisions that are made by what is called a Jewish majority. So any party, and this is what Netanyahu was saying the whole time, any party like Gantz's party, blue-white, that relies on Arab, we don't say Palestinian, on Arab support in Israel is illegitimate because Arabs have no right to decide the future of the land of Israel.
Ariel?
If you understand these mechanisms, how they work.
Ariel?
That's absolutely wrong. Israeli democracy is based on the same principles that every Western democracy. It is based on the participation. And of course, the Israeli Arabs have a lot of participations in any Israeli institutions. As you've mentioned, they now have at least 16 Knesset members, and those Knesset members have the same rights as any Knesset member, the same possibilities, the same opportunities. Of course, it's also the political game. You need to base your coalition, you need to base your influence through your political friends or political allies. It's a political game like in every other country. And of course, I oppose your term of Judaization of the country. By the way, maybe you do not know, but Jerusalem had a Jewish minority starting at the middle of the 19th century. Before Israel was established, the Israeli Jewish presence here didn't stop at any point. And even now we have the Arab citizens and the Jewish citizens. And of course, each one of them has the same right, for example, to have their home in Judea and Samaria. This will not be a Judenrein. The Jews are allowed to live in any part of the land of Israel exactly like the Arabs. No more rights and no less rights.
Okay, I want to bring in Omar Baddar because there's a few things here. I mean, Ariel even calling it Judea and Samaria, not the West Bank.
Of course.
Go ahead, Omar.
Because the name, the Judea and Samaria
let's
is
backtrack a bit. I frankly think even the description... Ariel, make room for somebody else to be heard as well. So even the description of Israeli democracy is a misnomer. Israel is not a democracy. Just think about the fact that in the occupied Palestinian territories, all the Jewish settlers who live there get to vote in the Israeli election because the Israeli government controls the occupied territories. And literally millions of Palestinians living under occupation do not get to participate in that election. So what you effectively have is a system of segregation. It's very similar to Jim Crow and racial segregation in the US from the past. And it's really a system of apartheid. And under those conditions, that's the reason why you can simultaneously have occupation and elections that produce people like Netanyahu. As for the Palestinian citizens of Israel who turned out for the vote and were pretty mobilized, that's directly in reaction to the fact that Netanyahu was engaging in racist campaign rhetoric that is targeting them and portraying them as a threat and portraying them as other. And it was basically a natural reaction. Unfortunately, while they have, you could say it's a positive victory, in a sense, that they have turned out in large numbers and increased their footprint in the Israeli Knesset. Nonetheless, this is not going to change what Israeli policy is towards the Palestinians living under occupation, which there is pretty much consensus. Even had Gantz won the election, that would not have really mattered and would not have changed anything, because the entire dominant Israeli political spectrum supports occupation and apartheid and annexation. And that's fundamentally what we're talking about. And we're talking about confining Palestinians to what effectively is an open-air prison in the West Bank and telling them that they get to call it a state. But obviously anybody whose IQ is above average room temperature can understand that this is not really a real state and that Palestinians are being denied self-determination.
Omar, when you see the UN Human Rights Council releasing a database of businesses and major corporations that do business with Israeli settlements that are illegal under international law, does it encourage you, or do you feel as if it won't go any further?
So, I mean, I think that's a very, very important step, but it's only a first step. Everybody agrees that under international law, Israeli settlements are war crimes. The actual taking over of Palestinian lands in occupied territory is illegal under international law. And so we need the next step of that, which is to say that if these settlements are war crimes, then we should not be doing business with them or with companies that do business in them. And you have in the Irish Senate an effort by Senator Frances Black to try to make it illegal to basically buy and trade in Israeli settlement products, and she's receiving significant pushback on that.
Right.
And that really is a no-brainer. I mean, how can you simultaneously say that Israeli settlements are war crimes and then say that we have to continue doing business with them? It doesn't make any sense. And that list that the UN Human Rights Council produced is a very, very important first step. And it's really about time that world governments got on board and started creating real accountability for Israel, because that's going to be the only way that we move forward towards something a little bit more productive.
Ariel, I ask you this question because you're a special advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu. You have his ear. Are settlements illegal?
Of course they're illegal. They're legal by our historical rights, legal rights, moral rights. By the way, nobody, no country, no civilized country considers them as a war crime. For Jew to live in any place in the world is not a war crime.
Do you consider...
You are just, what Omar said, excuse me, what Omar said is a racist statement. The Jews are allowed to live there exactly like the Arabs. No more, no less.
Okay, so then Michelle Bachelet is a racist as well, the UN Human Rights Chief.
Okay, hold on. I have to just interject here.
Come in.
And I just want to interject very quickly. We're talking about a ridiculous double standard here. Palestinians who live in the occupied territories are not allowed to go build settlements in Tel Aviv. And so we're talking about a one-sided approach here, where Israelis are allowed to take over Palestinian lands and build settlements on them. Anybody who objects to that racist system gets called a racist. It's flipping reality on its head.
Okay, Ariel, one more. Ariel, one more. Is there an occupation? Is there a military occupation of the West Bank?
There is military control of the West Bank, exactly, for example, like was before 1967.
Is it an occupation?
Jordan
okay, but how come Jordan occupied it, but you don't occupy it? So is there a military occupation?
I didn't use the language occupied. I told that Jordan controlled this land between.
But you wouldn't use the word occupation.
And 1967. Excuse me. And nobody objected to this.
Hey, I wasn't doing my show in the 60s or the 70s. Okay, so
nobody demanded to establish
Jeff Halper, I ask Ariel these questions because, Jeff Halper, we have somebody close to Netanyahu saying settlements are not illegal and there is no military occupation.
I do not call it, and nobody calls it settlement. What is the difference between
I'm sticking with the UN definition. Okay, I'm sticking with the UN definition, right? Okay, Jeff Halper, what does this mean? Jeff Halper, help me understand what this means.
A lot of Israelis like this guy live in an alternative universe where the whole world knows it is an occupation. The International Court of Justice in The Hague, every international agency has declared, and as a matter of fact, the United States itself calls this an occupation. I mean, that was the whole roadmap, and the whole Oslo process was based on that. And in an occupation, you have what's called the Fourth Geneva Convention, which is the international law that governs how an occupied power deals with an occupied people. And the Palestinians are a protected people in international law. And it's forbidden in international law. I think it's Article 41 of the Fourth Geneva Convention to build settlements and to move your civilian population into an occupied territory. That is illegal, and what Israel is doing is a crime against humanity.
Gentlemen, our time is
Not
up.
only your personal,
Every
it's
article of the
definitely
14th
not a violation of the international law, and I would like to reaffirm it. The Jewish man or Jewish woman have exactly the same right to build their home as Arab man or
Okay.
Arab woman.
Okay, we heard it.
Exactly.
Okay.
You do not have any right to
Okay,
build.
That's
gentlemen,
a lie.
our time's up. Listen,
Build your
Ariel,
home in an
Ariel,
occupied
Jeff, and Omar,
territory.
listen, our time's up. We're going to crash off here. You're all invited back onto the show sometime soon. Pleasure talking to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us. Omar Baddar, Jeff Halper, and Ariel Bulshtein. And thank you for watching. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.